Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for U.S. Mission Poland's Public Diplomacy Funding Information Session. My name is Heather Diogardi, and I'm joined by my public diplomacy colleagues here from U.S. Mission Poland, some of whom you'll be hearing from shortly. Before moving on to our presentation, we want to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we intend to place the recording on the grant program page of the U.S. Embassy and Consulate's website by February 13th. We also plan to have this English PowerPoint we're using today and a page of frequently asked questions translated into Polish, and also place them on our grant program page. On that grant program page, you will find our Notice of Funding Opportunities, or NOFOs, as well as all the required documents that you need to submit with your application package for funding. Today, our presentation will be in Polish and English, partly. Different speakers will be using different languages. You will note that all participants are muted currently, but when the presentations conclude, we will have time for questions, which you may submit at any time via the chat function. Questions may be posed in Polish or English. Note that we will not be taking questions that are specific to your application package today during this presentation. However, you are welcome to ask those questions and others not covered today in the presentation or in online materials via email to us at grantspoland@state.gov. Okay, so let's go through the agenda for today. First, we are going to be hearing from Mr. Brian George, Counselor for Public Diplomacy at U.S. Embassy Warsaw, who will be speaking in English about what is public diplomacy and about our office's mission here in Poland. Then we will hear from Ms. Jean Brigante, Cultural Affairs Attaché, who will be speaking in English about Mission Poland's public diplomacy priorities in 2024 to 2025, and what makes a strong grant proposal for public diplomacy funding. And finally, our resource coordinator at U.S. Embassy Warsaw will speak to us in Polish and take us through the grant application process. As mentioned, our speakers will then, after they conclude, take questions from the chat. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Brian. Brian, please.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And once again, thanks to everyone who's joining us online. We thank you for your interest in the possibility of partnering with the public diplomacy section of the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw and the Consulate General in Krakow, whether this is the first time you might be thinking about partnering with us, or whether you are a previous and potentially long-standing partner of the embassy. So we're going to start today's presentation by talking a little bit about what public diplomacy is, for those of you who might not already be familiar. So when we talk about public diplomacy at the embassy and at the consulate, we're talking about initiatives to strengthen people-to-people ties between citizens and residents of Poland and the United States to advance shared democratic values, mutual security, and the prosperity and potential of our two countries. We do that in a lot of ways. We can do that through exchange programs. We do that through workshops and trainings featuring American experts. We do that through programs that bring American and Polish peer groups together to exchange experiences and best practices. And we do that through cultural initiatives, just to name a few of the ways that we conduct public diplomacy. Next slide, please, Heather. So in shorthand, we like to say that our mission in the public diplomacy offices in Warsaw and Krakow is to connect Poland's current and future leaders to America and to Americans to promote shared prosperity, democratic ideals, and security. Next slide, please, Heather. So one of the defining elements of a public diplomacy program for the embassy and the consulate is American content. For us to consider a project for funding, there really has to be a significant element of American content. That can take many forms, and we've provided a few examples here on the slide, such as the participation of American experts, the incorporation of American models or best practices into training materials, initiatives that bring together Americans with residents of Poland, and the involvement of alumni of US government-funded exchange programs in which they have the opportunity to share their experience and lessons learned from their time in America. We know that there's a lot of great initiatives in Poland, and there's a lot of great NGOs and other non-for-profit organizations doing incredible work across the spectrum of Polish society. But many of those programs and initiatives will not meet the embassy and consulate's definition of public diplomacy. So we want to make sure that everybody keeps that in mind as you think about projects that you're developing, ways that you are thinking about working with us. So with that introduction, I will turn the floor over to our cultural attaché, Jean Briganti, who can speak more about the priority audiences and topics for our public diplomacy programs. Thanks, Jean.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And next slide, please. Good afternoon or good morning to some of you. And again, thank you for being with us today. It's fantastic to see the great number of participants and your enthusiasm for potential partnership with us around key themes. One thing just to remind at the top is that what we're doing today is going through information that is on our notice of funding opportunity. And this is a chance for us to both explain what may not be completely clear to you and give you a chance to ask us questions that may come either from the presentation or a question that you had as you go through your potential program and proposal development. So what we'd like to go through, this is not new information, but we wanted to go through the very top lines so it's very clear what the priorities are, what you can do to potentially make your application even stronger, some things to avoid in your development of your proposal, and then we'll go through some technical requirements. So one thing as you're developing your potential proposal is to look at the priority target. For us, and as we make our funding decisions, this is extremely important, and that's why we have really drilled down on our primary target audience, as we've described in the notice of funding opportunity. For us, our primary target audience is emerging Polish leaders who are between 16 and 35. These will basically at 16, you're looking at students who would be about the middle range of high school through age 35. At 35, depending on your definition of young or old, these are professionals. In some cases, established professionals, at other times, earlier points in their career. But these, what will link these is that these priority audiences for us are those people who are in fields relevant to our partnership, to our US-Polish partnership, and leaders in the community. We've identified a few priority program areas, and within those program areas, there are several different areas that we won't go through each one individually, but they are all listed in the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. We look at these priority program areas in essentially three main ones. The first is economic prosperity. Within economic prosperity, some program areas include, but are not limited to, those programs that might focus on women and girls in STEM, looking at business practices and cultivating those business practices among young entrepreneurs, and promoting trade and investment within the United States. We're also looking at security. Within security, this is of course a major year for security partnership as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the NATO alliance, and next month, the 25th anniversary of Poland's accession to NATO. Within that, within the security umbrella, we're looking for program proposals that would demonstrate the benefits of security cooperation, including but not limited to the NATO. As well, we're looking at programs that would strengthen cyber capacity. We're also looking at strengthening democracy as a priority program area. This could include leadership training, fostering innovation and critical thinking among young people who are between the ages of 16 and 24, promoting Holocaust education and awareness, and strengthening media practitioners and consumers' media literacy. These are examples of potential programs. They're not, your proposal does not have to be limited to those potential programs that I listed, but these are some priority program areas under those larger goals that we're looking for potential programming partnerships with you. Next slide. As you make your proposals and as we consider the programs that we would fund, there are certain projects and certain activities that are more typical of those that would be funded and eligible for funding under public diplomacy grants. And there are some that are absolutely not allowed within our grant regulations. So while these are listed clearly in the NOFA, we will go through these to underscore those that would fall into each category. So examples of public diplomacy grant activities we would typically fund include initiatives on themes or topics in the priority program areas that I just listed. This would include, but not be limited to, workshops, seminars, trainings, master classes, and exhibitions. These also might include programs that amplify the lessons learned by Polish alumni of United States government-funded exchange programs. I am certain that we have alumni of those United States government exchange programs on our call with us today. But just wanting to clarify, you do not have to be an alumnus of one of those programs to apply for grant funding. Other examples of PD grant activities we fund include youth engagement and leadership building programs, as well as participatory problem-solving workshops, such as tech camps. There are also some examples that we'll cite of activities that we will absolutely not fund. We are not permitted to do so under grant regulations. These include anything involving partisan political activities, programs which support specific religious activities, charitable, clinical, or development projects, any fundraising campaigns, construction projects, programs intended for institutional development, academic or scientific research, individual travel to attend a conference or courses at an educational institution. There are different funding streams for that outside of our public diplomacy grant funding, so those will not be considered for funding. Next slide. Okay, so now that you know a little bit more about what we are looking for in our as you develop your response to the notice for and consider developing a response for the notice to fund for funding opportunities, and you know a bit more about our priorities and what are some typical kinds of projects and programs that we fund and what we aren't allowed to fund. What gives you the best chance at writing a strong proposal, and how do you strengthen that? I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is to keep it simple and keep it clear and to follow the directions. That is absolutely critical. We will review hopefully a great number of these applications, and having a complete package that complies with the directions as set out and meets all of the criteria that are very clearly stated will absolutely increase your chances of success. As you write a proposal, You can increase its strength by making sure that your US component, which Brian mentioned earlier, is strong and is clear. That your proposal clearly supports the priority program areas that I outlined earlier, and that you make those clear linkages and show how your proposal supports those. That you clearly define the target audience. We've outlined what our primary audience is, and in your project proposal, you would need to define the audience for your proposal. And is this in line with what we're looking for? The goals and objectives for your proposal should be SMART. And that means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Your proposal should measure success against key indicators that you'd indicate as you form your proposal. How would you know at various stages throughout your proposal whether you've achieved success? How will you show that? Your proposal needs to include a detailed and realistic budget based on the time frame of what you propose and the activities that you propose. So think about that as you include that part of your proposal. And then finally, this is very important, but we see this a lot. Extra words don't necessarily help a project proposal receive funding. Additional paper is not going to help unless it is clear. For us, the most important thing you can do is to be clear and concise and to proofread. We know that that's sometimes that can be, after you've looked at something many times, it's hard to look at again, but please do before you make your final submission, because that will help us as we go through and review all the proposals that come to us. And the main thing for us is making sure that you followed the instructions, that you're clear, and the language does not need to be very fancy. You should be as concise and get to the point and show how your proposal is responding to the criteria that we've set out in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Now we'll talk a bit more about the technical requirements for preparing your proposals. And with that, we'll turn to our resource coordinator who will speak in Polish.
Dzień dobry, Szanowni Państwo. Obecnie na naszej stronie są ogłoszone 2 konkursy grantowe, Annual Program Statement i konkurs na temat festiwali kulturalnych. Wszystkie wymagania na temat kwalifikowalności opisane są szczegółowo w naszych 2 ogłoszeniach konkursowych w punkcie D, Application and Submission Information. Tak w skrócie tylko przypomnę, że o granty mogą ubiegać się organizacje non-profit, rządowe instytucje edukacyjne oraz osoby indywidualne. Wnioskodawca musi posiadać zarejestrowaną działalność w Polsce lub współpracować z zarejestrowaną lokalną organizacją. Wniosek wraz ze wszystkimi wymaganymi dokumentami powinien być w języku angielskim, budżet przedstawiony w dolarach amerykańskich. Uprzejmie prosimy o dokładne zapoznanie się z instrukcjami dotyczącymi dokumentów, które wchodzą w skład pakietu wniosku, ponieważ wnioski, które nie spełnią wymogów konkursu, nie będą rozpatrywane. Teraz powiem kilka słów na temat rejestracji w SAM, która zawsze budzi wiele pytań i zastrzeżeń. Wszystkie organizacje ubiegające się o grant muszą posiadać aktywną rejestrację w systemie SAM. Osoby indywidualne nie muszą spełniać tego wymogu. System SAM nie jest zarządzany przez Departament Stanu, dlatego nie mamy wpływu na procedury dotyczące rejestracji. Organizacje, które nie rozpoczęły jeszcze rejestracji w SAM, powinny rozpocząć ten proces jak najszybciej, ponieważ rejestracja może potrwać nawet kilka tygodni. Chociaż z doświadczenia wiemy, że często udaje się zarejestrować w o wiele szybszym terminie. Prosimy pamiętać, że dane adresowe, które wpisujecie Państwo podczas rejestracji, powinny być identyczne z danymi w KRS. Przy rejestracji proszę nie używać również polskich znaków. Po utworzeniu konta i zalogowaniu się do systemu SAM trzeba wybrać Create New Entity i numer UEI zostanie nadany w czasie tej rejestracji. Numer ten składa się z 12 znaków i jest to numer, który nie wygasa. Istnieje jakby przez cały czas trwania rejestracji, istnienia organizacji. Samo nadanie numeru UEI nie oznacza, że rejestracja państwa została zakończona. Trzeba ten proces kontynuować i ją zakończyć. Rejestracja jest aktywna przez cały rok i co roku trzeba ją odnawiać. Gdy złożycie Państwo wniosek o rejestrację, system dokonuje procesu weryfikacji wprowadzonych przez Państwa danych. Proces ten może trwać do 10 dni roboczych. Może również się zdarzyć, że po weryfikacji danych przez system SAM otrzymacie Państwo wiadomość, że rejestracja została odrzucona. W wiadomości z systemu SAM podane będą przyczyny, z jakiego powodu rejestrację system odrzucił. Należy wówczas zalogować się do systemu, skorygować dane, które były nieprawidłowe i złożyć ponownie wniosek, klikając kafelek Submit. Organizacje, których rejestracja wkrótce wygasa, powinny również rozpocząć proces jej przedłużenia, ponieważ gdy rejestracja wygaśnie, proces odnowienia może potrwać od 45 do 60 dni. Przy jakichkolwiek problemach z rejestracją należy kontaktować się z Federal Service Desk poprzez stronę www.fsd.gov. Trzeba utworzyć na niej login i utworzyć tak zwany ticket, czyli wysłać zgłoszenie z opisem problemu. Można również wybrać zakładkę Live Chat, żeby przedstawić problem na żywo konsultantowi. Adres strony Federal Service Desk znajduje się w instrukcjach na temat rejestracji SAM, które umieszczone są na naszej stronie pod Application Package. Teraz kilka słów powiem na temat przygotowania wniosku. Dla obu konkursów wskazówki dotyczące przygotowania pakietu wniosku są identyczne. Różnią się tylko terminami i kwotami przeznaczonymi na dany konkurs i przedstawione są szczegółowo w punkcie D Application and Submission Information. Ważnym elementem pakietu wniosku są wymagane formularze SF424, SF424A, SF424B lub SF424I dla osób indywidualnych. Wszystkie formy znajdują się na naszej stronie pod Application Package po prawej stronie ekranu. Prosimy pobrać formularze, zapisać je na swoim dysku, a następnie otworzyć za pomocą bezpłatnej wersji Adobe Acrobat Reader. Jeżeli chodzi o formę SF424, należy ją wypełnić, wydrukować, podpisać, wpisać datę i zeskanować. Akceptujemy również kwalifikowany podpis elektroniczny. Formę SF424A, budżet, należy wypełnić, forma ta nie wymaga podpisu. Formę SF424B należy wydrukować, wpisać datę, podpisać i zeskanować, chyba że macie Państwo też możliwość podpisania elektronicznie, podpisem kwalifikowanym. Formę SF424I dla osób indywidualnych również wypełnić, wpisać datę, wydrukować, podpisać i analogicznie zeskanować. Szczegółowe instrukcje w języku polskim, jak wypełnić formularze, linijka po linijce, znajdują się w Application Package. Proszę tylko zwrócić uwagę na numery NOFO, ponieważ każdy z konkursów ma nadany inny numer NOFO i ten numer musi być odpowiednio wpisany w formularze SF424 i SF424A. Ta informacja też jest umieszczona w tych instrukcjach w języku polskim. Jeżeli chodzi o wniosek, no to maksymalnie do 5 stron. Powinien zawierać wystarczające informacje opisane w taki sposób, aby każdy, kto go będzie czytał, zrozumiał, co wnioskodawca planuje zrobić. Szablon wniosku, czyli Grant Application 2024, który znajduje się w naszej zakładce pod Application Package jako pierwszy dokument, nie jest wymagany, ale gorąco rekomendowany. Jeżeli Państwo zdecydujecie się nie korzystać z naszego szablonu Grant Application, można użyć własnego formatu, ale musi on zawierać wówczas wszystkie elementy wymienione zgodnie z informacją na naszej stronie w punkcie D w podpunkcie C. W szablonie wniosku Grant Application 2024 w punkcie 11, jest to ostatnia strona, punkt 11 jest to budżet. Znajduje się tam link do tabeli budżetowej w Excelu pod nazwą Budget Proposal USD. Przygotowanie budżetu projektu w Excelu ułatwi Państwu wypełnienie formularza SF424B, ponieważ w tabeli tej znajdują się wszystkie kategorie budżetowe wraz z opisem, które wymagane są w formularzu SF424B. Dlatego zachęcamy gorąco Państwa do skorzystania z szablonu wniosku Grant Application 2024, ponieważ dokument ten jest dużym ułatwieniem nie tylko w kwestii przedstawienia wydatków, ale również uzasadnienia budżetu i opisania całego projektu. Wszystkie wymagane materiały aplikacyjne należy przesłać drogą mailową na adres grants@poland.state.gov W temacie wiadomości prosimy pamiętać o umieszczeniu nazwy organizacji oraz numeru NOFO dla odpowiedniego konkursu, w zależności na jaki konkurs Państwo składacie aplikację. Wszystkie organizacje, które nadeślą wnioski, informacje o wynikach konkursu otrzymają drogą elektroniczną. Next slide, please. Teraz tylko dla przypomnienia powiem o terminie składania wniosków na Annual Program Statement. Pierwszy termin składania wniosków do 15 marca, drugi do 30 maja, a wnioski na temat konkursu, na temat konkursu festiwali filmowych przyjmujemy do 1 marca. Dziękuję bardzo.
Okay, now we've come to the question and answer period of the program. Please submit your questions in the chat. We are monitoring it right now. Brian, did you want to direct us to our first question?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I will go ahead and take the first question, which was the question of whether U.S. writers and artists, the participation of U.S. writers and artists would also be considered as an element of strengthening Polish understanding of U.S. culture as a priority. So I would like to highlight when we discussed the priority program areas at the outset of the presentation, we were focused primarily on the priority program areas articulated in the annual program statement, notice of funding of opportunity. We do have the second notice of funding opportunity currently posted and open, which is focused on festivals in Poland. That NOFO in particular is focused on deepening an understanding of the United States through film, music, science, culture, and other festivals in Poland. We will entertain proposals for cultural figures outside of the festivals notice of funding opportunity according to the same evaluation criteria as we previously articulated. So looking at the degree to which those projects engage our priority target audiences, measuring the impact they will have, et cetera. So we do invite proposals in that area.
Do we have another question lined up?
Yes, the next question I'd like to ask our resource coordinator to answer, the question on the KRS number.
Well, actually, when it comes to some application address, this is the correct address. When it comes to Polish ID and KRS, what do you mean by Polish ID? Do you mean REGON? Tak, jeżeli chodzi o adres sam.gov, to jest adres prawidłowy, a jeżeli chodzi o numer ID, czy to Państwo macie na myśli numer REGON, mówiąc o polskim ID? No to numer KRS-u musicie Państwo podać i ewentualnie widzę, że tutaj jest pytanie, czy musi być tłumaczone dokumenty, które świadczą o Państwa statusie non-profit. Nie muszą być tłumaczone na angielski, mogą być załączone po polsku. Może to być wyciąg z KRS-u, czy jakakolwiek inna dokumentacja, statut również.
Okay, going down the list, there's a question about the age. There is not an age requirement for those who would make a proposal for a grant. The age that you saw in the notice of funding opportunity refers to the age range of the primary priority audience, not relating to the age of the organization applying for the grant and the individuals associated with that. If that's the question on age, whether someone is this question on older than 37, absolutely, you may apply for a grant. There is not an age limitation or any kind of age restriction for that. Looking at the next question, worldwide, we have outlined the funding that we anticipate to be available under this notice of funding opportunity to be approximately $150,000 US dollars. We anticipate to award up to 8 awards, and that is for within our United States mission to Poland. Within the that is for the annual program statement, NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity. For the festivals NOFO, we anticipate there's a different range for the minimum and maximum of funding, as well as a difference in the total available funding. These figures are all on each Notice of Funding Opportunity. For the festivals NOFO, we anticipate $35,000 of total available funding, and we expect to fund up to 6 awards rather.
And maybe I'll take the question. There's a question related to artistic projects and theater performances. I'm not sure if I understand the question entirely, but I can confirm that yes, it is possible to submit a project proposal for the performance of theater works by American writers or with American performers here in Poland. We would not be providing support for theater performances that take place inside the United States or otherwise outside of Poland. I hope that answers the question there. All right, there's also a question about barriers that hinder women's advancement in STEM fields and business. The question is, does this mean that the project must be addressed only to women, or they constitute more than half the number of participants? I think that there's 2 things to highlight there. One is that as we think about barriers that hinder women's advancement in STEM fields and business, the definition of the problem would drive a determination of who the appropriate participants for projects in that space are. So a focus on removing barriers to women's advancement does not preclude by definition the participation of male and or females in the project. And then secondly, I would note that we do have an overall focus on supporting scientific and economic innovation, and that those projects likewise could be directed to a range of target audiences. So there's no limitations there in terms of gender for those programs. In general, we do try to support gender parity across the full spectrum of our programs.
Widzę tu pytanie na temat if registration in SAM takes so long, what is the chance for new organizations to take part in the first round of the PD Poland Annual Program Statement? Tak jak wspomniałam Państwu, zdarza się, że często udaje się organizacjom zarejestrować dosyć szybko, dlatego zachęcamy do jak najszybszej, że tak powiem, akcji w kierunku rozpoczęcia rejestracji. Im prędzej Państwo to rozpoczniecie, nawet jeżeli się nie uda Państwu przysłać zgłoszenia na konkurs w pierwszym terminie, to jest jeszcze drugi termin. Ale zachęcamy, bo tak jak mówię, często udaje się organizacjom bardzo sprawnie zarejestrować.
There's a question on an eligible project budget. As we look at the eligible project budget, we're going to look at realistic costs in terms of the amount of time that a project would take and a project element would take. And we're also going to consider what our funding restrictions are. Funding restrictions are clearly outlined in both notices of funding opportunity, but as a reminder, we are prohibited from funding fees and travel costs to attend conferences in the United States, unless that is part of a longer term program or project that directly ties to activities in Poland. We are prohibited from funding ongoing salary costs, for example, to stand up or to maintain an operation of an organization. Funding, we may not fund office equipment, nor pay to complete activities that began with other funds. In general, refreshments are restricted. However, that does not include coffee breaks and working lunches, which are part of a program. For example, if there was a tech camp or a workshop that ran from the morning until the evening, it would be reasonable that participants in that program would certainly need to eat and drink. And those costs for coffee breaks and working lunches are allowable within a budget, but on that, alcoholic beverages are never allowed, are never allowable costs within grant proposals. Also, other non-allowable costs include vehicles, real estate purchases, or construction projects.
Okay, we have a question about whether a Polish University High School Partnership educational project involving a field trip to the US for a group of students would be eligible for funding. The leader would be a SUSE alumnus. Say yes. That is a proposal that could be considered for funding. As I indicated before, we'll assess all projects based on the same set of criteria that's outlined in the notice of funding opportunity, but that is a type of activity that could be considered. We have a question about which is, do we understand correctly that young leaders aged 16 to 35 are an obligatory target group, and or additionally they can include established professionals and other mentioned target groups? So 16 to 35-year-olds are a primary target audience. They are not the only target audience, and it is not obligatory that they be included in every project. So as you consider your project and the problem that you are seeking to address, that will really drive the determination of who is the appropriate target audience for that activity. So that could be in the 16 to 35-year-old range, or that could be a group of established professionals or community leaders. So we leave that to your discretion. All right, we have a question related to limits on the inclusion of current or former Flux alumni and Fulbright ETAs, and also whether emerging leaders includes those resident in Poland or only Polish nationals. So there's no limit on the inclusion of current or former Flux alumni or current or former Fulbright ETAs. In terms of the question of whether whether participants can be residents in Poland or just Polish nationals, yes, you can include in your projects both Polish citizens, those who have individuals who have legal residence or temporary protected status in Poland.
There's a question on, can we empower women in the project by teaching them programming? Must there be American lecturers, or might they be Polish? In this case, the American component could be American content, could be delivered by American, could be American content, not necessarily delivered by Americans. We're looking at American content to be subject matter. In cases, some cases can be the individuals or groups that are delivering the content. And it could be alums, for example, of United States government funded programs, but we're looking at content, the individuals delivering that content or participating in the program do not need to themselves be American.
Okay, I see there are a couple other questions related to age limits. So we define the primary target audience for our annual program statements as young people who are aged 15 to 34, 35. Certainly, if you have people who are individuals who are slightly younger than that or slightly older than that, you are welcome to include that in your application. What we will be looking for first and foremost is a clear articulation of why that demographic that you have chosen is appropriate for the nature of the project and how that relates to overall program priorities that we have articulated in these notice of funding opportunities. So I don't want people to get too caught up on the question of what happens if they're 14 and a half or what happens if they turn 36 during the course of the project. Most important thing is for you to have a clear articulation of why that's the appropriate target audience to address the problem that you have defined, and a clear articulation of how that supports the priorities that we have identified in our funding notices of funding opportunity. In general, there's also a couple of questions I see about the timeline for decision on the review process. So in general, we will endeavor to make funding decisions within 6 weeks after the deadline for applications. All of our decisions are subject to the availability of funds, and our funding is determined by the U.S. Congress. So there are some occasions when we may not be in a position, we may have made a decision, but we may not yet be in a position to actually provide funding for a project that we seek to support. But in general, we will try to provide those notifications within 6 weeks, and we will try to provide notification both of funding approval and decisions not to fund. There's a question. Sorry, there's a question about air travel by a U.S. air company. So anytime we provide funding for a project, we must adhere to the Fly America Act, which has certain regulations about the use of U.S. flag carriers. So that is information when we do make funding decisions. We share with our future partners what we call the standard terms and conditions for federal award agreements with the United States government, and that outlines the Fly America requirements as well.
Okay, there's a question on the festivals grant, if we can include other activities outside of a festival, if there are outside activities for a musician in a school, for example, or a workshop. then yes, if you're considering this as a proposal to be part of the larger project. So where, for example, an artist or a group would be part of a festival, and then this would be additional programming, particularly if this programming is also targeted at our primary priority audiences, then yes, absolutely, please include that. Okay. As we mentioned at the top, in terms of specific questions about your proposed project, some questions, they're obviously very specific without knowing all details of what you have in mind. The stay of visual artists, painters, or theater artists from the USA coming to Poland to perform artistic work within the scope of the grant. I think Brian covered that earlier, that we will consider looking at the what you propose in terms of reaching your audience, and whether your proposal we will consider outside of festivals construct. Yes.
There was a question earlier about letters of support from partner organizations, whether they're required and whether we have a standard format for that. I'd like to direct that question to our resource coordinator.
Where is this question? The letter, we don't have the form, I mean, nie mamy, przepraszam, to trzeba po angielsku, nie mamy formatu takiego listu. Dowolny format, jaki Państwo uważacie, że można użyć. Szukam właśnie tego pytania, gdzieś mi uciekło to pytanie, żeby odpowiedzieć całościowo na to pytanie. Już mi gdzieś tu uciekło to pytanie. I listy od partnerów nie są wymagane. Jeżeli Państwo macie takie listy, możecie Państwo takie listy przedstawić. Trudno nam zdecydować, jakie elementy w tym liście powinny być zawarte. Tak jak mówię, nie ma żadnego wzoru, więc co Państwo będziecie, że tak powiem, uważali, żeby w tym liście wpisać, żeby zarekomendować Państwa instytucje, organizacje, to trzeba to po prostu wpisać.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add that if in your proposal you are stating that another organization is going to provide some sort of support for the project, whether it's logistical, whether it's in the form of the participation of trainers or experts, etc., then it is important to be able to document that and show that you have that support from the organization that you're referencing in your proposal. There's a question about whether we give preference to organizations over individual artists. I think the short answer is no. We are always looking at, whenever we receive a proposal for an individual or an organization, one aspect of our review is to assess the ability of that organization or individual to actually execute the project that they have outlined, and to demonstrate a track record of success in carrying out an activity in that space. So, we're looking for that evidence from every applicant, whether they are an individual or an organization. There's a question about whether we are able to fund an exchange between Polish and American artists, that is Polish artists going to the US and American artists coming to Poland. By nature of our mandate at the embassy, our primary focus is on establishing connections to America here in Poland with local audiences. So while we would, we don't necessarily prohibit projects that involve artists going to the United States, we would be looking very closely at what skills, knowledge, or experience those individuals would be bringing back to Poland as a result of their program. And that's going to be the primary lens of focus for us, as opposed to what impact they might have on American audiences while in the United States.
Widzę, tu jest jeszcze pytanie na temat, czy dokumentacja potwierdzająca status non-profit powinna być w języku angielskim. Nie wymagamy tłumaczenia tych dokumentów na angielski, także można je załączyć w języku polskim.
There's a question about if a festival has about 30% of American artists, not solely American themed, but a high level. I think that with this, as what Brian mentioned earlier about whether a student is 14 and a half or a professional is 36. There is not going to be an absolute. We're going to look at, while the ages are certainly guidelines, in this case, there's not going to be a percentage test. We're going to look at the criteria and has your proposal met that criteria? Is there strong American content? Depending on there is absolutely no prohibition that a festival and its content has to be theme has to be 100% American. Absolutely not. But there has to be a strong American component. There is not a certain limitation or a certain percentage guideline. There was another question, just speaking about kind of numbers. There was a question about whether we anticipate only up to 8 grants. Of course, in a budget environment, we have set what we expect to be the maximum for this particular call, which is one for the annual program statement. Notice of funding opportunity, that is a maximum of $150,000. And we do expect to fund up to 8 grants. Of course, we have not, the deadlines are not yet here, so we have not seen the applications yet. So of course, those are what we've anticipated based on the individual project mins and minimum and maximum, and what we assess to be reasonable. There may be some variation depending on the quantity and the quality of the applications that we receive. But those are guidelines and the likely confines that we expect.
Okay, I think we're going to have to make this next one our last question to wrap up by 4. Do you have a question for us, Brian?
Well, I have. I was looking at the question again about whether an American artist could apply for the award, or if it has to be Polish. So American artists can apply, can submit a proposal for funding. Again, the important thing there would be able to demonstrate that if you are applying from outside of Poland, that you have either a strong track record of implementing activities in Poland already, or that you are working in partnership with a local organization or individual who demonstrates their ability to host and organize programming for the American artist. So with that, perhaps a relatively short answer, we have an opportunity for one more question here. And I think also for our resource coordinator, we have a question about an international NGO that is already registered in SAM and whether they need to register separately as a Polish branch with Polish registration documents.
No, if the international NGO is already registered in some, we do not need a separate registration. Nie wymagamy oddzielnej rejestracji. Jeżeli już instytucja jest zarejestrowana, jedna rejestracja wystarczy, ponieważ system nawet by nie przyjął tej rejestracji od państwa. Także tak to rejestracja, którą państwo posiadacie, jest w porządku. Chyba że polski oddział ma zupełnie inny adres i ma inną nazwę, to wówczas tak. To wszystko zależy, jak państwo będziecie składać wniosek, bo jeżeli będzie to jako międzynarodowa organizacja, będzie składała wniosek, to wówczas musi zostać tak, jak jest, ale jeżeli to oddział polski będzie składał wniosek, to wtedy polski oddział jakby musi mieć swoją rejestrację oddzielnie na polski adres.
Okay, so
jedno na temat KRS-u, dokumentów. Na to pytanie szerzej odpowiemy w naszym dokumencie najczęściej zadawane pytania, które będą potem umieszczone na stronie. Także tam będzie szczegółowa informacja na ten temat.
Okay, and final word. So just to be clear on the festival's NOFO, yes, this can be we will accept proposals for the integration of American individuals into established Polish festivals. At the same time, if somebody has plans to create a new festival with American content, we will also submit and we will also entertain proposals of that variety. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to all our speakers today. Thank you for your questions. We know that we may have not gotten to all of them, so please remember to visit our grant program page of our website. Someone put it in the chat, but you can also find it at pl.usembassy.gov under Education and Culture. You'll find the grant program, and that's where we post all of our NOFOs, all of our information required documents. And once again, if you have further follow-up questions in Polish or English, you can email us at grantspoland@state.gov. Okay, thank you all for joining us today, and good luck with your applications. Goodbye.